All right, guys, we're at the University of Washington. We have a spicy topic today. We are debating that not all cultures are equal and that some are superior. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment what you thought down below. Let's get into it. So what's your question?
Well, I was curious about the poster you had that said, I think every culture is not equal. There are superior ones.
Yeah, so I have a big issue with the sort of modern push to sort of say that all cultures are equal and take away any ability to discredit certain cultures or bad things that certain cultures do. It seems like if a culture has a bad, like blanketly immoral practice, you know, it kind of just becomes one of those things, oh, it's just their culture. It's like, for me, no, I mean, it's their culture, but it's not a good thing that they're doing, right? So some examples of these are like especially things that neglect or ignore the consent of women and children. I would say like bride prices, they commodify women, slavery, Nazis, breast ironing in Cameroon and West Africa, human sacrifice, female virginity testing in Africa and Asia, basically super invasive testing to sort of prove that a woman is a virgin before she's married off, which is another one, marrying off women and effectively selling them as if they're a commodity to be bought and sold. Forced veiling, so forcing women to veil, forcing women to not speak in public in Afghanistan or to not go to school in Afghanistan. Veiling also happens in Iran. Female genital mutilation, and the list goes on and on. All of those things are consentless, and they predominantly affect women and children. And so I would say that any culture that practices those things is inferior to cultures that do not practice those things.
Okay. I mean, I think the first issue I have is just like calling one culture superior to another. I also think another thing that might be important to note is like the impact of technology. I mean, I know that that's not exclusive to all countries, but I think it definitely does have something like to play in. So how are you distinguishing like between what is something that's cultural versus what is something that's like circumstantial to like the technology available and the information available?
It seems like if something is a practice that is common throughout a specific culture and is generally unique to it or another branch culture, it seems like that would be something that would be a cultural thing. Like, for example, neck banding of children in certain tribes in Thailand and Myanmar. So basically what they do is they'll put a band or a ring around a child's neck, usually women, to meet beauty standards. And then after that ring, they'll add another ring and another ring and another ring and another ring until they think it elongates their necks. And it does make their necks appear longer, but what it's really doing is taking their shoulder blades and shoving them down their spinal cord so that they have this super long neck, but it's not actually their neck, it's their spinal cord, and it's really bad for their health. And the children don't have a choice. It's forced upon them by their parents. And so when a culture practices things like this or allows things like this, or it's okay to do these things within their culture, I would say that they're probably inferior to cultures that don't do those things. For example, if you're a culture that practices slavery, I would say that you're inferior to cultures that don't practice slavery. I would say that modern day American culture is superior to colonial American culture because we allowed slavery. So I think that there should be a concerted effort to push away from these things, even if they're cultural practices among certain peoples. And that doesn't mean that every person who's, you know, a tribal person from Myanmar or Thailand is a bad person or inferior, because you can always pull yourself away from culture and assimilate into new cultures or ignore certain parts of your culture and not practice them. For example, like abolitionists in colonial America. So I don't think that it's not a race thing, it's not an ethnicity thing, it's specifically related to practices which are practiced through choice.
Okay. So I guess, first of all, you would acknowledge that you're part of a culture yourself, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say that the danger I see is not like in identifying the wrongdoings or things that might like be harmful in a given culture. The issue I really have is calling one superior to another. I think, like we are really aware of like the neck binding, for example. One thing that's really apparent in our culture is strong healthcare and like medical knowledge. So I think that makes us very aware of the negative impacts and implications of something like neck binding. I think other cultures have like a lot of things to say about like specifically different practices within our culture in terms of like the ways that maybe mass consumerism or individuality may impact or take away from our collective like functionality or our well-being or something like that. I think it's easy for us to look out and see those negative things very apparently, but it has to be from a culture. It can't be like a perspective that's just omniscient or able to like hold them all equally. I think, yeah. So.
Well, I mean, it would be my subjective opinion that some are superior and some are inferior. And I acknowledge that there are bad things about every culture, including ours. So, for example, I think one really bad thing that strikes me about American culture is the really unhealthiness of it, the exorbitant eating, the overweightness, the like failure to preserve your own health. But that's something I think is bad, but it's like you choose to do that to yourself, so it's not like an immoral thing. But like so maybe neck binding won't be a good one to open you up to my perspective. I have one that might be good, like spousal rape in the Middle East. Like that's not a thing where we don't understand the health implications. That's just a bad thing to do. You can't rape your spouse. Right. So, but they do that in the Middle East, and it's legal in a lot of Middle Eastern countries. And another thing is not allowing women to educate themselves, or like suti, which was a Hindu tradition where they would expect women. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but they would expect Hindu women whose husbands died to self-immolate to prove how loyal they were. Self-immolating is like lighting yourself on fire. So these are all things that I think are super bad, regardless of how you look at them or what level of information you have. Raping your spouse is not a good thing ever. If your wife tells you no, you should not have sex with her, and you also shouldn't restrict women from literally being parts of society at all. So, all right. Do you believe that all cultures are equal?
No.
You don't? Okay, cool. Why don't you think that all cultures are equal?
There's like a lot of so I guess I'll start off by saying I'm very conservative, I guess you could say. Okay. Not really conservative, but like, in between. Sure. I have a very strong opinion about how I think that all cultures are not equal, and there's a very big gap and like fight between them due to the fact that there's a lot of, I guess, positive movements that are being taken in very south direction, being formerly like the BLM movements. Then you also got like a lot of other, I guess, like culture movements. I'm Hispanic. My parents are from Mexico. I've grown up in a Hispanic household. My small town is here in Washington. It's full of Hispanic people there. So it's been a very, I wouldn't say I haven't had a culture shock, because I did grow up, before I moved here, I used to live in another small town where it was predominantly white. I got to meet a lot of people from different races and stuff, and it's really nice. But one big thing that I always notice in my small town, for people who always grew up in there or just like limited there, is that they all have very closed-minded when it comes to other races, and usually it's them like basically kind of like ganging up on and ruining the other cultures, and I heavily disagree with it.
What cultures did you see like ganging up on people?
Usually white people. It's like you rarely hear about it, but
like they gang up on white people, or white people gang up on them?
It's white people. No, I mean them ganging on white people, or like not necessarily ganging up on them or like being them physically, but it's more or less like kind of like disapproving of their ideals,
like
or
belittling, kind of. Yeah, like
it's what they think is happening to them, but in reality they're doing it to them, and that's where I'm like, that's not cool, because it's like you're arguing here that you have all these things that we're like inferior, yet still this small town. I know it's like one town compared to the whole entire like city, United States,
just
but
what you saw, yeah.
But it's like, it's harsh, because then I also like see it from other places, and I'm like, well, yeah, you can say that, and I do agree that there is like, there are people who like, don't agree with you, or who like kind of like, honestly, they kind of, what's the word? They disapprove of you, yeah, because of the fact that you're like this race or you're this other race. And I don't think it's fair. Like, from both sides, it's not fair. And I like heavily disagree with it. But to say that I sided with someone is like, I really don't. When people say, oh, but you're Mexican, you should be proud of like being Mexican, and like acknowledging you're a minority, you're like this big culture, and you can make such a big improvement in the US. I'm like, yes, I do see it, but the way that you put it and the way that you demonstrate it to the world, I disagree with, because I don't think that by putting someone to shame you're making your culture better. You're just making yourself look like a bigger asshole.
Okay, so
I actually brought this for you, but I think it got cold.
you brought this for me? Oh my God, thank you. What is it? A hot cocoa?
It's hot cocoa.
Oh my God, that's so nice.
We've been sitting out here all day, and it's cold. So
I appreciate that. That's very nice. Did you bring me the coffee because you agree with a lot of my prompts, or did you just bring it because it was just to be nice?
no, I actually disagree with like basically most of what you said, but
Really?
I believe that we should strive for understanding, and even if we disagree, we should still treat each other with respect.
I love that. It's very nice. I love the gesture. Because I agree with you. That's why I do this. Is I think that we need to respect each other and have respectful, informed conversations. And I like to make people think, and I like to show other people, specifically like young, influential men, that you don't have to be assholes to people who you disagree with. Because I feel like there's a tendency to be rude or disrespectful or think less of people who you don't agree with. And I think that that's probably not the approach that we should go with. So do you think that all cultures are equal?
I'm not really sure what it means by the question. Like, what do you mean, are all cultures equal? Like, how are we defining it in this case?
So basically, in my view, I think that there's a concerted effort to sort of, basically, if you say that something about a culture or some practice is bad or wrong, I feel like there's a concerted effort to like shut people down and say, no, it's just their culture, respect all cultures, whatever. And I think that that's wrong, because I think that there are bad things that certain cultures do, things that are immoral, especially when it comes to like the consent of women and children. And I think that we should be able and allowed to call those things out as we see them.
I agree with that, but I don't. Okay, so by superior, I think that's like a wrong way to put it. If you say that some cultures are superior than others, there might be some more morally questionable things in modern day, but I'm not sure if you want to call it superior.
Yeah, so I use superior because it's eye-catching, and it's less words, so I can fit it on my sign. But the other thing too is I think really eye-catching phrases and prompts are important, because I learned a long time ago by watching content on the internet, similar stuff, that I would see, this prompt, and I'm like, there's no way this guy justifies. Like, this is crazy. And you kind of close your mind to it a little bit, but then when you hear the arguments, you're like, wait a minute, I was wrong. And so I think that's very important to teach people, is just because something sounds crazy doesn't mean that it is. And so that's basically what I'm trying to do, is also give an exercise to people who go to UW of be open-minded, basically, and think about things like this. And some of the examples that I have are child labor, selling women off for marriage, because I think it commodifies women, child marriage, bride kidnapping, so where you kidnap a woman and sell her with little to no consent, slavery, Nazis, bride, price and dowry, like I said, breast ironing in Cameroon and West Africa, human sacrifice, suti, a bunch of other stuff. So
I'm not sure if anyone will disagree with you that those things are bad
Yeah,
necessarily.
This one is just to get people to think. This one is people feel less strong about it than like abortion or Israel that I've done in the past. So this is just basically an exercise, like a thought experiment, make people think, stuff like that. So.
Oh, okay. I guess we agree. Yeah, I don't, like, I'm Korean, and like there's definitely some aspects.
Did you poison me?
But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some aspects of like every culture that I think you could definitely say are like, oh, it's culture, but also we can agree that like not it can be still problematic.
Yeah. I basically just want to push people to acknowledge that there are bad things about pretty much every culture, and we should do our best to eliminate those bad things and try to replace them with good things. Like, for example, if you compare America to its previous state, like slavery, women can't vote. Women are basically viewed as invaluable completely. They can't vote. People are slaves or viewed as property, or Jim Crow, segregation, stuff like that. I think that American culture today is far superior than like colonial American culture or American culture in the 50s or whatever. So, because we just generally treat people better, prioritize rights, stuff like that.
Yeah. I think in the same way that there are problems and people that commit atrocities in the United States, there are things in other countries that are and I would also like push back and say that like I mean, especially on social media, there's a lot of discussion about, especially like modern day Middle Eastern practices. Like, it's not as if this is like something that's embedded completely into culture. In the same way that there are like older, less modern practices among older generations that even within the United States we might deem as like immoral or unimaginable today. Like, I think it's the same way within other countries where there's things that are phasing out, but perhaps still have a grasp on, especially like older populations.
Well, the reason I chose this topic is I have a big problem because I'm very active on social media, as you probably could have guessed. And when I talk out about things like child soldiers in Gaza, women not being allowed to leave their houses without the permission of a male guardian, women's testimony being worth half that of a man's in Gaza, or other just like generally sort of Islamic inspired cultural traditions, I get called Islamophobic. And I'm not Islamophobic, but I do think that there are a lot of cultures within Islam and specifically in Middle Eastern countries that have a lot of really bad cultural practices that lead to a lot of really bad outcomes for people, especially women and children, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
And I think there shouldn't be a shutdown of the conversation about those things because we should always be trying to move towards a better situation for everyone. And when you ignore those things and just say it's just their culture, like
Right.
it's not. Sorry, your water's here.
Oh, thanks.
It's not. It is their culture, but
Sure.
we can't pretend that it's not a bad part of their culture.
Yeah.
Just the same way that we sort of had cultural reform in the United States. We got rid of slavery. We got rid of like codified human rights violations against black people. Those were all deeply embedded parts of our culture in the United States, but we had to eventually acknowledge that those were not good things that we were doing and get rid of them.
Right.
Mass support for the KKK, stuff like that.
Like, all of the things that you mentioned, especially within the United States, they changed because of internal revolution, right? Like, people started to form different perspectives. So I guess the thing I would really push back on then is, like, why are you focused so intently? Like, I agree completely that we should be acknowledging, especially injustices to women and children across the world. But, as someone that isn't within those countries, like, I think a lot of times people can become upset about, especially when you put it in the lens of superiority, like sort of implementing or trying to push your own personal perspectives onto a country that is already going through, its own revolution and also its own struggles. So I think from an outside perspective, like it's a pretty imperialist thing that especially Americans tend to do, and I think it can be sort of it is like not really the right place for us to focus our energy. I completely agree, like we shouldn't shut down the conversation, it should be talked about. I also think that, it isn't necessarily our role as another culture to then implement those changes in a part of the world that we're not in. We should be focusing on the community around us.
Sure. I enjoy geopolitics. You know me, I come here with a different sign every day, so I think this is an interesting topic. I think it's important. What did you say? Furthermore, as far as like internal revolution goes, I really, especially in like Middle Eastern countries and African countries, I really don't think there's a lot of internal revolution happening. You might hear some people talking about in Iran or people from Iran talking about how they don't like veiling laws or whatever, but any internal revolution that's happening is usually happening from Islamic fundamentalist groups. Like look at Afghanistan, for example. They're the country that probably is the most restrictive on women, allows spousal rape, doesn't let women leave their houses without a male guardian, enforces veiling laws, can't educate women, et cetera, et cetera. They just had an internal revolution, and the people who do those things are the ones that won. They were the revolutionaries, and now the Taliban are in charge. So they also happen to have millions of dollars worth of equipment directly from the United States military. So I just see that as a problem, and I think that people should talk about it. And the point of these prompts is really, I care about these issues to varying degrees depending on what it is. I care about Israel a lot. I care about abortion a lot. This I feel kind of meh. I think that it's important to challenge popular thought, though. And a lot of people walk by and say, "Oh, that's Nazi shit," and it's not. I think it is true. Superior just means better. And I think that there are some cultures that are better than other cultures, and I more specifically think that there are aspects of certain cultures that are better than aspects of other cultures, specifically when you value consent and child rights. So do you believe that all cultures are equal?
Well, I wanted to ask what you thought about it. So I guess it depends what you mean by cultures, right? Like every society has norms and it has social processes. I'm actually doing a master's program in developmental psychology here at the University of Washington. And something we're learning a lot is that, humans organize in many different ways.
Yeah.
And there's historical reasons for that. There are political reasons for that, economic, and, just it's culture is a force within itself. So I guess, do I think that all cultures are the same? I guess it really depends on what priorities the culture has, right? I don't think there's good or bad. I guess it depends on who's doing the judging in that regard, right?
Yeah.
Because, for example, I'm Ecuadorian. I'm from South America. I'm quite proud of that, I think. I understand that there are problems within my society, the society where I come from, right? But then there are things that I think I value a lot that are part of my Hispanic heritage that I don't find in culture in America, right? When I moved to the States, I realized one of the big things that I noticed as a child was how individualistic society here was. And I'd really missed a more communal, family-oriented, it's just a different dynamic, right? And so, there's definitely things that culturally, I guess it depends what you define as culture, that maybe some groups do better than others, but again, it depends on the priorities. But I think the root of the question kind of is hard when you try to take an objective stab at it, I guess, because then it can come from a place of an objective truth of this is good in all cases, historically, politically, in that regard. And so, I guess to answer your question, I don't even think it's an answerable question. I think the answer that you come up with is really dependent on the angle or the views or the priorities that you have, depending on the society that you come from, right?
Sure.
I think I just don't. I guess my real problem with the question is how useful it is, and I guess I read the little thing you have there. Where it kind of seemed to me that you're a little right-leaning, if that's a true,
it's true,
right? And by the way, I consider myself a pretty centrist person.
Yeah.
I try to look at really both sides of things, and I think I've often seen that question not used in the best way possible by the right, particularly. Sure. The left can also not be the best at using the answer to that question, right? And so that's why I was more here kind of curious to get your perspective on it, because I actually deal a lot within my community as a leader in South Florida, and I've seen a lot of instances where I've actually seen the positive things that can come with when you engage with your community culturally and you try to empower them to achieve or do better in a system like the one we have here, right? Yeah. But I think it really takes a humble and an inclusive approach, which is the reason why I'm also a little iffy about the right, to bring in those people and help them be the best that they can. So
my view is basically I think that there are a lot of bad things that happen in the world. I think there are a lot of bad cultural practices. And what I see a lot from the left is respect all cultures. You cannot call out people for cultural practices. You cannot call out cultures for what they practice in their culture. And you're racist if you try to do that. And my thing is I don't think it's even a race thing, right? Because you can separate yourself from bad cultural practices, not practice them, or even assimilate into other practices or other cultures. So I don't think that it has actually anything to do with race at all. I think it just has to, and you also have to deal with subcultures and stuff like that. And
look at Ecuador. We're a small country, and we have our subcultures. And we're like a tiny little country, man. Yeah.
And so, some things that the real big things that I would look at when determining if a culture is good or bad or has good or bad practices. And I do think that all cultures have good and bad things about them. But I think that some cultures, for example, on a minor level, I think that one really good thing China does is and actually Asia largely has a very strong emphasis on education and bringing honor to their families and stuff. I think that's something that the United States does as well, but not nearly as good as they do. So that's something that could be minutely bad about American culture. Or another minutely bad thing about American culture is I think that we tend to eat in an overabundance and become obese, and like we have a very unhealthy culture. But that's not something that I would say like makes you a bad culture. The things that I would say like make you a bad culture is particularly honing in like the violation of consent and the rights of women and children, forced veiling in Afghanistan and Iran, not allowing women to educate past a certain age in Afghanistan, also in Afghanistan not allowing women to speak in public, forced marriages, bridal purchase, so like buying women because I think it commodifies them, reduces them to property, child labor, child marriage, female virginity testing in Africa, parts of Asia and the Middle East, which are just like super invasive tests on women to prove that they're virgin so they can be, again, married off for a price. And I think that those things are like just blanketly immoral because they violate. I base everything based on the non-aggression principle. So I think that if you unjustly aggress somebody, that action is just blanketly immoral and wrong. So a lot of these are cultural practices. Another good example is in like Myanmar and Thailand, there are tribes who like band the necks of women when they're children. So like, you know, you put a ring and another ring and a ring, and that doesn't actually make your neck longer. It pushes your shoulder blades down your spinal cord, and you end up with this huge portion of your spinal cord completely exposed. It shortens lifespans, causes all kinds of chronic issues, and the children don't have a choice in that. And so, I mean, I think I heard somebody today argue that like that could be a thing where like they don't have access to like the medical technology to determine that is a wrong thing to do, and like you could fairly make that argument, but I think really when it comes to especially a lot of like Middle Eastern countries and their cultural practices and laws, and you look at like spousal rape and not allowing women to educate, those are things that like you don't need medical technology to figure out those are wrong things. You know what I mean? You actually don't need any information to figure out those are wrong. So those I would view that as like inferior cultural practices. And the reason I think it's useful is not to like shame people or anything like that, but if you are called racist for ever calling those things out, they'll never change, and they'll stay that way forever. So
I mean, I think we're moving as a human species, and we're coming to an awareness that stuff is not right. Because I mean, again, I'm a big believer in self-determination, in the potential of humans, right? Regardless of your color of skin or your gender. I mean, heck, I'm here. You know what I mean? I traveled all the way from Quito, right? I went to school.
Is that in Ecuador?
Yeah, that's the capital. Yeah.
Nice.
I immigrated to this country, went to school in Miami, did computer science. I work at Microsoft now, you know, and I'm now studying at this incredible school. Like the journey and the human potential that you could say the society has afforded me, right, is great, right? And that's and I think I totally agree with you with that those things are something that we should definitely not encourage, right?
I mean, I would always push back on the phrase better, because I think that's just like, you know, its own philosophical debate. Like, I can completely understand, but I also would say, like, again, the like cultural practices that we find so atrocious, like I would agree that like there are fundamental things that I value, including the lives of women and children, that would make me want to push back against these cultures. But it's not to say that like the United States isn't full of its own like crimes that, you know, distinguishing between individual action and culture is like not, or is non-arbitrary, the way that you draw that line. And so I just think that while we should, you know, talk about the things that we disagree with across the world, like it is always dangerous to like put yourself above another country and to then like sort of like, I don't know, throw rocks down.
Well, how about, let's try this. So you said that you have sort of a problem with the word better, or kind of like a gut reaction or something. If we compared like 1776 United States to modern day United States, 1776, slavery is legal, women can't vote, we have tons of internal cultural problems, we don't value women, we don't value black people, compared to 2025 America, where we allow women to vote, we value women, we put women on a pedestal, black people can fully move about the country, they can educate themselves, they can buy property, they can live wherever they want, they can vote in elections, etc. Would you say that 2025 American culture is better than American culture in 1776?
Specifically, like, American culture is better for everyone, yes. I mean, I think like there's been a lot of anger, especially among like white men, especially recently. And so, you know, I think part of that is that for them it isn't better. From their perspective, like they've lost social power. And so it is more difficult for them to like do things and be successful than it used to be.
I agree with that, actually.
So, yeah, I think it is perspective based in many ways.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope that gave a little insight in like my perspective when I use the word like better or superior. Like it's just about improvement and sort of I guess like evaluating something or giving it a rubric or a scorecard based on what it values. And I think the most important things to value are consent and rights. So
I guess my last question, because I have to run to class soon.
No, you're good.
Like if this is such an important thing to be talking about, what is the U.S. role in like addressing these types of atrocities? Because go for it.
I don't think there really is a U.S. rule. Like I don't think that we're not going to like go to war with countries that force veiling. I think you could probably sanction countries that force veiling or don't allow women to have rights or whatever else. We're not the policemen of the world, but it's just about when we have these conversations about cultures online or whatever, and you call something out. I feel like there's a concerted effort to like you can't do that. All cultures are equal. You need to respect everyone's culture. That's what they do. And for me, it's like a lot of times these things are just blanketly immoral, and you can't just that's their culture. No, it's wrong. What they're doing is wrong.
Right.
Like child labor, wrong. You can't do it, or you shouldn't be allowed to do it. Not that I believe in like international law or one world government or anything like that. I don't think there should be any single apparatus enforcing these laws, but I think there should be a concerted effort to make the world a better place.
Okay. So then I guess my response to that, my version of what you're saying, I think that when people have political discourse online, something that's really important to maintain is sort of like an openness. Like you need to sort of be inviting someone to have a discussion with you and to see your perspective. I think that is like an obligation that we have because a lot of times political discussions online go south. Like they become something just so much more like it's about proving a point. I think when you use a phrase like superior, you're not inviting someone to have a discussion about like these things that usually get overlooked. It's sort of like terminology that really puts people on edge and makes them want to be combative. Whereas if you're to sort of say like, hey, these are the things that you care about and they're going on in other places and you're making excuses for them, I think that can be more opening and sort of like less.
Yeah, the only problem I run into is I just don't have enough space on the paper.
That's gonna be a lot of words to put down.